Welcome, everyone, to Alaska Quarterly Review's 2022-23 reading series. I am Ronald Spatz, Editor-in-Chief of Alaska Quarterly Review, and this event is being recorded and will be available on the Alaska Quarterly Review YouTube channel. Please feel free to watch any of our prior programs and to share them. Alaska Quarterly Review is committed to presenting these programs without charge and to showcase vibrant and diverse new and emerging voices and literary conversations with depth, complexity, and humanity. Like all literary magazines, AQR depends on grants, tax-exempt donations, and subscriptions to operate. If so inclined, donations and subscriptions are gratefully welcomed on AQR's website, aqreview.org. Before we begin, I'd like to make a few important acknowledgements. Alaska Quarterly Review gratefully acknowledges the Anchorage Museum for hosting and providing technical support for this event, and the Center for the Narrative and Lyric Arts, Alaska Quarterly Review's 501c3 umbrella organization, which makes this event possible. I also want to make a land acknowledgement. Alaska Quarterly Review recognizes the indigenous land on which all Alaskans live. AQR is located in Anchorage, and Anchorage is Dena'ina homeland. Dena'ina is the language spoken by the traditional, present, and future caretakers of this land, and land acknowledgement opens a space with gratefulness and respect for the contributions, innovations, and contemporary perspective of indigenous peoples, and marks our collective movement toward decolonization and equity. Today, we have the pleasure to feature two members of the Alaska Quarterly Review editorial team, contributing poetry editor Elizabeth Bradfield and Christine Bile, senior affiliate editor of prose fiction and literary nonfiction. Both have new books out. Elizabeth, an exceptional anthology, Cascadia, that she co-edited, and Christine, a beautiful debut novel, Lookout. I will introduce them now, and then they will each read, and at the conclusion of their readings, I will turn the mic over to them for a conversation. Elizabeth Bradfield is the author of 5 collections of poetry, most recently Toward Antarctica, which uses haibun and her photographs to query the work of guiding tourists in Antarctica, and Theorem, a collaboration with Antonia Contro. In 2005, Bradfield founded Broadsided Press, broadsidedpress.org, a grassroots virtual collaborative publishing project. Broadsided pulls literary work out of journals and puts it onto the streets. It brings together words with the energy of original visual arts, publishing monthly collaborations on the website as PDFs that are downloaded, printed, and posted around the world by vectors. She is also co-editor of the anthologies Broadsided Press, 15 Years of Poetic Artistic Collaboration, 2005 to 2020, and the newly released Cascadia Field Guide, Art, Ecology, Poetry, which has just been published by Mountaineers Books. Her work has appeared in the New Yorker, Atlantic Monthly, Poetry, The Sun, Orion, and her honors include the Audre Lorde Prize and the Stegner Fellowship. In addition to teaching poetry at Brandeis University, Bradfield works as a naturalist guide and biology field researcher. As Robin Becker wrote in a review of her book, Once Removed, the uneasy connection between ecological mindfulness and expedient economics complicates Bradfield's perspectives, making her a trustworthy guide. Encounters in the wild, in the non-traditional families, and in the distinctive cultural settings occasioned in her poems, in which speaker negotiates physical and psychological proximity. Christine Bile is the author of the just published novel Lookout and Dirt Work, an Education in the Woods, which was shortlisted for the 2014 Willa Award in nonfiction. Her prose has appeared in Glimmer Train Stories, The Sun, Crazy Horse, and Brevity, among other journals and various anthologies. A recipient of multiple grants from the Rasmussen Foundation, and from the Alaska State Council for the Arts and the Alaska Literary Award in 2015. Bile has been a fellow at Breadloaf, a writer in residence in rural and underfunded schools, and as I mentioned earlier, a senior affiliate editor of Alaska Quarterly Review. Christine has made her living as a professional trail builder for over 25 years and lives with her family in interior Alaska on Dena'ina lands. Julie Kastner wrote in Shelf Awareness, Christine's Bile's Lookout is an unforgettable novel, both stunning and subtle, written with nuance and compassion. This astonishing novel of work, love, community, and forgiveness in the 20th century rural Montana will leave readers forever changed for the better. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Christine.
Thank you, Ron, for that introduction. Thank you, Cody and the museum for the support. Thank you, Elizabeth Bradfield, a poet and naturalist that I so admire. Our books coming out at the same time give us a lovely chance to co-inhabit a space that both of us care a lot about, the way worlds and people and places overlap. And I'm going to start off reading the opening from Lookout. This is the cover. And I don't know if it was mentioned in the opening, but it was published by A Strange Object, which is an imprint of Deep Vellum. And I want to mention that in particular to give a shout to all of the amazing nonprofit and independent presses that are publishing work in these years that are often my very favorite places to be. So it brings me great joy to read to you. I think this might be the first public reading I'm doing from the book. So let's start it up. I'll be reading from chapter 1 from the very beginning of the book. It doesn't need any backstory, I believe. We'll just start the way you would if you opened it. Chapter 1 is called Start Small, and it's set in 1985. The summer of the fires started cool and damp. A heavy snow in early May buried pasque flowers and daffodils and the barely rising shoots that would become the season's crops. But by the end of the month, the sun lit up like a match. Standing water dried faster than it had in years, and by June, the once puddled ground was hot and hard as a steel skillet. No one remembered the cold. Midsummer, Cody Kinsler woke to light. Bedtime and morning looked alike. Crickets and stars hidden by sun, the only thing visible, the strut of day. By the time Cody stirred, dark was hours gone. She lifted her arm against the light between the slatted shades, the back of her hand tanned above her moon-white palm. In the mornings, Cody's father was outside, always. She often ate breakfast alone, Louisa sleeping late and their mother with the hens or in the garden, and Cody looked out the window to see the weather unchanged, hot, blue, bright. Cody was 9, old enough to pour her own cereal or make toast, dark and hard, topped with a soft-boiled egg cooling from the stove. Her mother said too much salt, but Cody liked it between her teeth like sand. She practiced wolfing her eggs like her father did, fast so she could help him with the stock before he left for work. Josiah bent around the stall gates and horses' necks like wire, his hand laid firm on withers or roughing a satiny neck against its grain. The animals' morning noises hushed as they fell on their food, and the sun shouldered into the dim barn between cracks in the warped boards. When Josiah left for the hardware store, Cody returned to the house to see who had appeared, her mother from outside, her sister from their bedroom, wordless and sticky-eyed. Louisa slept like it was her job. All morning, Cody roamed. Pasture to aspen grove, riverbank to gravel pit, she ranged like a prospector. The dogs followed close, disappearing in brush after squirrel or scent, to emerge again later so reliably that Cody hardly noticed they were gone. She sat on the paddock fence and scratched the horses' flanks when they pressed her legs. She trapped mice with a baited tin can, held their noses up to hers, and let them go. She bounced pebbles at the chickens, which ruffled them into great squawking piles, and then chased them until she could lift one in her arms, light as a loaf of store-bought bread. Margaret glimpsed her daughter when she thought to look, but mostly Cody's days slid past in unwatched hours. Louisa darted in and out of her games, less often than she used to, as phone calls and girlfriends and moody hours in her rooms supplanted their sisterish rhythms. Alone, Cody dug holes, sorted dirt and stones into piles. She rarely threw rocks anymore, not even small ones, since Clint Lindsay put out the eye of a crow by accident. The bird had staggered the schoolyard in circles, its eye a bloody pit, wings spread, croaking angry protest. Cody loved the chickens and would rather have put out her own eye or Clint's. She liked to cause a ruckus, not to harm, but sometimes it was hard to tell the difference. Cody lay on her back in the grass looking at the sky and the mountains pushed against it, flat as paper shapes in the harsh sun. By noon, the air shimmered. The Kalispell Daily on the kitchen table said 85, Western Montana's hottest summer in years. The dogs panted, even in the shade. Cody, Margaret said, she's our dreamer. Cody didn't call it dreaming. She called it pretending or thinking. When she saw a red-tailed hawk, she practiced her call. She could imitate a barred owl, a handful of songbirds, robin, meadowlark, chickadee, and a great horned pair calling back and forth. Raptors were her recent interest. Cody preferred fierce to pretty. On the first morning when smoke hazed the eastern horizon, Cody went to the barn and Josiah wasn't there. The wide doors loomed shut, the iron bar slotted into its groove. She entered the door, the side door to vaulted dark. The horses and mules shifted in the stalls with soft and windy noise. Even in the building, she could taste faint smoke. She patted her horse's nose. Where's Pop, Daisy girl? The door at the back of the stalls stood ajar, but the rear shop was empty too. In the dark, the logs and boards and Josiah's half-built projects looked asleep. The table saw was covered with a tarp, and Cody lifted an edge and crouched to peek beneath. As a littler girl, she'd constructed forts under the table saw, an ominous, noisy roof, until her father told her he didn't want her too comfortable near a dangerous tool. Now she counted the rough planks stacked against the wall. 4 shelves, she knew, for the wardrobe he was building. Cody found her mother on the side of the house pulling snap peas from the snaked vines. Her hair was tied back with a knotted navy kerchief. Where's Pop? He's not in the barn or the shop. Upstairs, Margaret said. She bit an end and spit it out before chewing the rest of the pea. Sleeping. He'll be late for work. The horses aren't fed. Margaret trimmed another pea with her teeth and handed it to Cody. He isn't feeling well. Let him rest. Can you tend the stock? Yes, she could. Cody swung the barn doors wide and, with the cement block, propped them open to give the horses light. Pulled apart a bale and loaded fresh hay in troughs. Filled each water bucket with the hose and rewound it properly on its metal wheel. She fed Daisy by hand, first the pea and then a clump of hay, the horse's warm muzzle peeled back to blocky teeth and shining gums. A bee drifted in and buzzed like a low plane. Upstairs, her parents' bedroom door was shut but not latched. Cody pushed it open with her finger, a crack to peer through. The room was as dark as the barn. Josiah lay in bed, a lump beneath the quilt, curled to face the wall. Too hot for covers, she thought. Pop, she whispered. The quilt moved up and down while he breathed. Pop? A little louder. He didn't answer. Cody had never seen her father sleep during the day, not once. She closed the door and twisted the handle so it latched without a sound. The hallway was roasting, and she escaped down the stairs and outside in such a hurry that the back door slammed behind her and bounced. All day, he was quiet and she was loud. The next morning, Cody went out to the barn and was relieved to see the doors standing open. From outside, she could hear boot heels clanking against the planked floor. She leaned in to look before she gave herself away. Josiah wore clean Wranglers and his summer straw hat, store clothes. Are you all better, Pop? He turned toward her. I'll be fine. After lunch, Bobby Watson stood out the back door with his freckled, runny nose pushed up against the screen like a tiny pig. Can you come out? Bobby asked. He lived across the road, not quite to the T. The Kinslers' nearest neighbors were the Lindsays, who shared the fence line and were more like family than friends. The Lindsay boys, Clint and Nate, teased Cody for playing with Bobby, who is grubby and unkempt in a different way than regular ranch kids. Not dusty jeans and hat hair, but a pallor to his yellowish skin even in summer, a smell like cooked onions hanging on his clothes from living in a one-room cabin where the bed was next to the stove. The kids at school said Bobby was dirt poor. Not one of them was rich, not even the Lindsays, certainly not like TV or the kids from Whitefish High with their fancy uniforms for sports. But Bobby was something else. Cody knew his father had lost his job when the sawmill all but closed, but really, Bobby had never had more than he did now. His shoe soles flapped at the toe, and he brought a sack lunch that you could tell was almost empty even from across the room. Other kids ribbed him, but Cody's mother always said, play with anyone, unless they're mean. In that case, leave them alone. At the river, the wind stirred up the air and the smell of smoke drifted in and out while Cody and Bobby threw bits from their pockets into the water. String, lint, paper, chicken feed, the current pulled it all under and down, skidding in and out of the eddies that cupped the rocks. The river was fast here, even for the dry season. Cody wore her bathing suit under her shirt, but knew better than to swim without a grown-up. A girl from the high school had drowned the year before, a half friend of Louisa's, that tall, red-haired girl with a braying laugh who could ride bareback. The river came into Cody's mind sometimes, the kicking white surf on the rocks, how it made her feet so cold they disappeared. Another hot day, she saw a grizzly standing out in the river up to its shoulders, its big neck and scoop face sticking out, the way a dog's does when it swims. As she watched, the bear shrugged out of the water and toward the opposite bank where it stood on the rocks and shook so hard she could hear it over the river's rush. It surprised her how skinny the bear looked, dressed in wet fur that hung from its belly like a fringe. Bare-legged now, shorts held high, Bobby was up to his shins in the river where an eddy stilled the current enough to stand in. Cody watched from the bank as Bobby pissed in front of his feet. Gross, she said. Bobby waited in front of her, peeing. Get away, I don't want to see your stupid little wiener. Cody's disgust pleased her. She pinched her eyes shut and put a finger in each ear to block out the sound of urine pouring on water, but peeked when Bobby turned away. She thought of peeing in the bathtub, so yellow coming out and then invisible. My wiener is not little, and you should see my dad's. No way, Cody said. Gross. To her, it looked like a tiny plastic toy, a rubbery finger puppet left over from a birthday party. Bobby zipped his pants and splashed out. His gaze roamed behind her and settled. Cody turned. There was Clint, 13 and half tall, always looming bigger than he was. Clint was part neighbor, part cousin, part wild, and Cody drew toward him one day and shrugged away the next. Look what I got. His smile a dare. A small box of matches came out of his pocket and lay in the palm of his hand, balanced to show. The wood kind, they don't bend when you light them. Clint struck one match against the box edge and let it burn. Cody stomped a foot as the flame got close to his fingers. He flicked it into the brush. She watched the arc, ready to spit on the ash, but the air extinguished any spark. The fire, she said, then stopped. They'd heard for weeks about the Glacier Park burn, spreading to Forest Service land, how many acres? But the wind constantly shifted, and this hour, the sky sat blue and harmless, no smoke in sight, the only scent faint as a far-off campfire. Clint ignored her protest. They light on stone. Against a rock big enough to sit on, he struck another match. It hissed and flamed in a quick snap. Clint handed the box to Bobby, who lit two more and thrust the box at Cody's chest. She pushed his arm back. Matches were a risky game, forbidden in any weather. Bobby, I know where a weasel lives in our shed where we can watch. Her voice was bright as she could make it. She didn't address Clint, but he answered her without looking. What baby cares about a shitfucker weasel? Clint stood up on the balls of his feet and rocked back, grinning at the sky. He cursed enviably, as easy as talking. Bobby watched them with his hands by his sides. Cody lit the first match with stiff arms, blowing it out fast. The tip barely blackened. It was hard to breathe. Don't waste them. Clint snatched the box from her. You have to use them all the way. Cody tore the box back and held it behind her. Clint could change the day like a switch flipped on, a bright zing. She hated to be bossed, but it made her brave. At home, she was allowed to light matches, to start a morning fire in the wood stove, or touch the candle wicks to flame. Out here in the sun, The matches were dimmer, but the heat felt near. They passed the box back and forth, and the rest of the matches, 50, went quick as they lit sticks and grass seed heads, letting them burn, then dropping them in the river, where they hissed out and shot downstream. Clint mouthed the sound of dropped bombs, and Cody's insides went night quiet. She lit one purple match tip from another, the blended flame an instant brighter surge. Clint licked his fingers and put out a little torch between his pointer and his thumb, so Bobby did it too. Show-offs. The last match caught Cody's sleeve. She watched the loose cotton threads curl and go ashy, mesmerized, and so she let it go too long. When she mashed the cuff against the dirt, it left a blackened smudge at the wrist. Her favorite shirt, a blue summer weight chambray like her father's, with pearl snaps and red-stitched pockets. Too hot for that, Cody, her mother said, but Josiah never wore short sleeves. Cody smelled her cuff. It stunk. She imagined burnt skin instead of cloth and looked up to see Clint squinting. He could turn his baby face into a threat. Cody, you tell our dads Clint motioned his hands a blend of ring and punch. It looked ridiculous, but scared Cody anyway. Clint was smart enough to hunt down his own trouble and turn it into someone else's. Cody invited Bobby in for a snack, cornflakes and milk, though she hated to watch him chew, his mouth wet and loud as a cow and his head hung down, shoving. He ate like this at school too, and Cody wanted to tell him that letting your hunger show so much was dangerous, like a window in your bedroom with no curtain. Disgusting, sang Louisa when she flitted through the kitchen in her swimsuit. Bobby watched her with his mouth full and his eyes gaped. Iced tea sloshed in Louisa's glass and her painted toes knocked against the pale wood floor like a red sound. Cody's own feet were coated with sap on the bottoms, thick enough on the heels to stick a pin through. She called them her summer shoes. Cody sat next to Bobby at the table and ate with one hand, her shirt sleeve pinched in the other palm. Out the window, Louisa spread her towel in the grass and lay on her belly with her Walkman's headphones over her ears. She sipped her tea through a straw, and the sun hit her skin and made it shine.
That's beautiful, Christine. Thank you so much. Elizabeth?
Oh my gosh, it is such a pleasure to hear that first chapter of this beautiful book. I'm a little bit teary here because I love this book so much, and to see it come into the world is such a pleasure. And we have a lot to talk about, but I'll step back and talk about Cascadia Field Guide now. Like Christine, this is the first time that I'll be sharing bits of this anthology in public, so it's a real honor to do that with the company of AQR, who's really been such a supporter of my work, Ron himself and the magazine, and I've been really honored to be part of it, and to share this with Christine, who's such an amazing writer and a dear friend, is really almost too much for me. So I am going to read from Cascadia Field Guide, Art, Ecology, and Poetry, which is not a novel, but an anthology, a field guide. J. Drew Lanham calls it a field guide, and I think that's maybe a more accurate representation of what this book really is. I've co-edited this anthology with the amazing Derek Sheffield and C. Marie Furman, and the three of us together, we started this project 5 years ago to the month, and it's been kind of a joyous and fascinating process. We're in the tradition of other literary field guides, like the one for the Sonoran Desert and the one for Southern Appalachia. And this book honors the region of Cascadia, which is where I grew up and where I've worked for many years. Cascadia stretches from Southeast Alaska, really from Mount St. Elias in the north down to the Eel River in Northern California, from the Pacific coast over to the Continental Divide in the Rockies. So it's a big region. And this guide gathers 128 beings from Cascadia. Iconic beings like brown bear. I can't wait to talk about that description of brown bear in Christine's chapter, and more special, lesser known species like the giant Palouse earthworm. And each of those beings is honored by poetry, a natural history story that gives the facts of that being in terms of Western science, and also the story of encountering it and some of the cultural knowledge associated with that being, and a piece of visual art. So the book as a whole is organized into 13 communities, kind of starting at the north. We've got Tidewater Glacier, Muskeg, Temperate Rainforest. If you head east, you've got Eastern Rivers, the Shrub Steppe, and we have a couple of urban communities, a couple of ephemeral communities. Each of those 13 communities is honored, animated by the work of one visual artist. So that's a long explanation, and we can get into more details later. But let me just start with by showing you a little bit of the art that's within the book, and then reading you some of the stories that go along with that art. So I'm gonna hop over and share my screen briefly. So hopefully you can see this cut paper collage. This is by the artist Sarah Van Sanden, who is a Seattle-based artist and landscape designer. And here she's presenting the overview image for the coastal urban woods community, which I envision as, Seattle, maybe more salty than Portland, but Portland's included, Vancouver, British Columbia. We've got a Madrona, a sword fern, a little mountain beaver tucked into their hole, some salal, vine maple, a mason bee, and of course, the most iconic of all trees in the Cascadia bioregion, the western red cedar. So I'm going to read the overview story for the coastal woods community, and then I'm going to read the Madrona story and the poem that accompanies it. Madrona is such an iconic plant of Cascadia, and one that's really beloved to me. The other two images I want to show you are from a community further down the line, the Outer Coast community, which is animated by art by Rhea Friday, who is an enrolled member of the Lummi tribe and works both in watercolor and drawing, as you can see here, and is also a glass artist based now in Olympia, Washington. The Outer Coast open ocean community was really important to us to include in the Cascadia Field Guide, because even though it's a little bit less accessible, you can't just walk out your door and be in the presence of a lot of these beings, but the coast is so influential in so much of this region. And then I also want to share a little bit of the tufted puffin story. Again, this is Rhea Friday's art animating the tufted puffin, a being of Cascadia that I love dearly and have really fond memories of spending time with in Southeast Alaska in particular, both in Glacier Bay National Park and anywhere else I've been lucky enough to catch this being flying overhead or bobbing along in the waves. So I just wanted to share some of the art. You can see how that the style of each community is very different. Each artist has their own approach. Sarah Van Sanden uses cut paper collage, and Rhea Friday uses drawing and watercolor. And each of those communities is touched by the individual style of the artist and holds those beings in community. And that was really deliberate on our part to make sure that these beings felt like they were at home with other beings in their community. Okay, so I'm going to stop my screen share, and I'm going to share with words some of the bits from Cascadia Field Guide. I'm going to share the introductory story to Coastal Urban Woods with art by Sarah Van Sanden. And the Derek and C. Marie and I wrote these stories. The art and literature held within the book is unique to a huge range a huge array of voices from Cascadia, from Colleen McElroy to Ursula K. Le Guin to Nora Marks Downhauer, and beyond. Recent arrivals and generations deep residents. But the stories that kind of anchor and thread the book and present it as a unified whole were written by myself and Derek and C. Marie. So, coastal urban woods. To stand in the coastal urban woods of Cascadia is to stand in two worlds. In one, the roads, strip malls, and skyscrapers of the built world threaded by meridians, parks, and yards, and in the other, a wild tangle of sword fern and salal, still towered by red cedar and buzzed by mason bee in secret nooks and crannies. For many Cascadians, this is where our connection to the non-human world begins. Stellar's jay, bright and alert as any city kid, hops among the peeling branches of shoreside Madrona, maybe sussing out the developing berries, maybe just curious in a particular corvid way. At night, mostly unnoticed, small mountain beaver emerges from an intricate system of burrows to forage, perhaps seeking young vine maple, a favorite food, though they must be careful of barred owl swooping down from above or coyote patting the now quiet greenways. Wild beings still thrive here in the coastal urban woods, linking cities and suburbs to the places that existed long before the first windowsill or paved driveway. Take a moment. Stand on a curb near the edge of a vacant lot or ravine. There are so many lives going on above and below you in the shadows of branches, yearning, as branches, toward light. So that introduces the coastal urban woods community, touching upon some of the beings held within and some others that we just didn't have room for. And here's the story and the poem for Pacific Madrona. I know some people say Madrone, but I grew up saying Madrona, so I will persist in my habits. And the story of Madrona is going to be followed by a poem that I wrote that was included in my first book of poems, interpretive work. Pacific Madrona. Madrona's skin, smooth and bright chartreuse when young, then aging to a brittle cinnamon red that curls from their trunk in delicate papers perfect for writing secret notes, is unmistakable. This tree's white, urn-shaped flowers hang in large, drooping sprays that, in fall, become bumpy orange-red berries prized by robin, cedar waxwing, varied thrush, and quail. People find Madrona's berries bitter, though they can be used as bait for steelhead, perhaps because of their resemblance to fish roe. Also called madrone, madroño, and arbutus, Madrona grows tall as a 3-story building and bears evergreen leaves that are oval, shiny, and dark. No wonder Madrona was mistaken by interloper George Vancouver as magnolia. In fact, Madrona is the only broadleaf evergreen native to Cascadia and is North America's most northerly broadleaf evergreen. Madrona does shed their leaves, but not all at once, bit by bit, like Sitka spruce or Douglas fir. Madrona grows along the coast from southern British Columbia to San Diego, tolerating a wide range of temperatures and rainfall. You think Madrona is hardy? Think again. Although tough in their ideal conditions, this tree is fragile outside them. It turns out Madrona's health is incompatible with modern human land development, such as pavement and lawns. Madrona likes sunny, well-drained areas and is fire adapted, resprouting quickly after a burn. Notoriously difficult to transplant, most likely because of their critical relationship with mycorrhizal fungi, Madrona resists human interference, so we must learn about their historic ecology in order to nurture them. Some people call Madrona the refrigerator tree because the trunk is always, even in the height of summer, cool. Straight Salish tribes say that survivors of the Great Flood anchored their canoe to Madrona on the mountaintop, and in gratitude for Madrona's help, they do not use the wood as fuel. The tree is sacred. So here's the poem that accompanies that being story, and it's titled Succession. In the neighborhood called Magnolia, they've planted magnolia trees to right an old mistake made when George Vancouver's crew saw thick-leaved madronas on bluffs over Elliott Bay and misnamed them. Magnolia trees outside the coffee shop, magnolia trees, native to this continent, but not its northwest coast, land of cedar and salal. They are leafed out, staked up witness to our desire for truth-making. Outside the post office on Magnolia, magnolias. Magnolias glossy and tended by the antique store, fenced in the sidewalk by the bus stop. Meanwhile, the madronas, whose peeling trunks, burnt orange and sleek, colors layering from Granny Smith to pomegranate, papery with curls I've peeled and scrawled, here since the last glaciation, slow-growing and picky, waste away in neighborhood parks while beautification committees worry, and try, unable to hear what for madronas is truth, what the tree wants is burning, to burn among huckleberry and Oregon grape, then bud from the leftover roots. Moldered by lawn and dogs and all we've brought with us to make things nice, the madronas wait for lightning, for some untended spark to argue their need against our clipped and tended ideas of care. And now, I guess we're kind of staying in the same zone, but we're going to head to the outer coast. Again, this is a community animated by the art of Rhea Friday, and it holds many pretty amazing beings like tufted puffin and sea otter and Pacific octopus. And here's the opening story for Outer Coast. Once you venture beyond the protected waters of the Salish Sea, you'll find another world waiting. Some familiar beings might accompany you, sea otter, killer whale, tufted puffin, but offshore, you'll be influenced more by the Kurashiro Current coming across the Pacific from Japan and the California Current flowing down from Alaska than by shorebound Cascadia. Look out at the horizon. Keep a sharp eye. You never know whom you might find. Short-tailed albatross, northern elephant seal, pink-footed shearwater, sperm whale. So much is possible in the cosmopolitan Pacific Ocean, where beings travel with ease across human-drawn borders of nations and time zones. You are as likely to see a vagrant from the far western Pacific as a nearshore local taking a trip out into the depths. Either way, one of the formative essences of Cascadia is our oceanic connection to the North Pacific's wild waters and distant lands, be they Russia, Japan, Hawaii, or the Philippines. In the open ocean, we all touch one another's shores. Indeed, Cascadia's human cultures are part of this rich exchange and have been for millennia, from the arrival of the first people across Beringia many thousands of years ago to Spanish colonial forays up California's coast in the 1500s to the Russian fur traders drawn by reports from Vitus Bering's voyages in the 1700s. Coastal people like the Makah learned to build watercraft that can manage the Pacific's waters, enabling them to make the migration of gray whale part of their community, and other oceanic bounty nurtured the rich cultures developed on Cascadia's outer coast. More recent people arriving from across the ocean, Chinese, Japanese, Vietnamese, Cambodian, Samoan, and more, have continued that trans-Pacific sense of self that is unique to Cascadia. Here, we touch an ocean that binds together all of who we are: storytellers, homemakers, scientists, thinkers, traders, gatherers, and sometimes exploiters. And it is at this coastal seam that future meets past, where we may dream into what may be if we recognize and honor what links us all of us who live alongside sea otter, Pacific octopus, and other outer coast beings who have lived here long before humans even took breath on this earth. And this community is opened by an excerpt from a longer poem of mine titled Deliquescence that was first published in Alaska Quarterly Review and is held in the pages of my book Once Removed. So here's just an opening address to that big community from Deliquescence, which is defined as the liquid resulting from the process of deliquescing. Dawn on the bow, or some hour early enough to be, at least for a while, alone. Firm horizon denied by mist, prow rocking forward into swell. Sky becomes water, water, sky, and I dissolve, dwindle, disband, disperse, dissipate, become delinquent to the self. This water, this water, this cloud, light, liquid, shiftless resistance, this rendering of all we might become. And I think I'll stop there. I think I'd like to have some time for Christina and I to chat, and you'll have to discover Tufted Puffin with Rhea Friday's art and Anastasia Renee's amazing poem on your own.
Okay, so we'll turn it over now to the two of you. Thank you both. Liz, that was wonderful. A great, amazing, extraordinary anthology.
Thanks.
Okay, now it's all yours.
Oh, Liz, what a pleasure to hear that aloud. I could listen to Liz read like a Burger King takeaway menu. So I maybe am not the best judge, but it's so good to hear the lyric, the factual, all the convergences that I associate with your creative work in general over the whole body of your writing life are all so beautifully interwoven here. And I just feel like cheering from the rooftops. So
It's mutual. It's really mutual. I guess we should let people know that Christine and I met in graduate school, actually, before classes even started. We were put together in a carpool to go pick blueberries, and that was that. So to be here and to read with her is extra special, meaningful. We've never read together before, so this is such a treat.
It's true. Of all of our years of kind of either coordinating events or attending them or planning them or whatever, we have never been in the same space like this. So I'm very grateful to Ron and AQR for making it happen. And yes, so how shall we start? How shall we dive in?
I have a question for you. I'm just curious. I mean, I think, it might not seem like an anthology field guide and a novel are parallel companions for a conversation like this, but I see so much overlap and interesting intersections, ways that they're different, ways that they're similar between both of these books. And I think one thing I see is how much Lookout place is a character in Lookout as much as anything. You can't remove that story from the place that it's set, and that's communicated through the attention you give to pasque flowers and brown bears and rivers. And it's also just in the histories of the land itself. And I wonder if you can talk about that aspect of Lookout and how that deepened over time. I know you worked a long time on this book, how that changed.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about that. I think when we were first discussing how these two books could go together in a reading, because they have this strange kind of serendipity of coming out within like a week of each other, even though they had very different germinating periods. Like you said, at first it seemed like, oh, maybe that's a little bit of a reach. But as we started talking about it, Liz and I came to kind of separate articulations of a similar feeling, which is that in a way, Lookout is a novel that is imbued with a sense of natural history, and it's taking the form of a story, but it is full of grappling with the natural world. And Cascadia is a field guide that is inviting story into the place where facts usually reign supreme. And so I think it's a very cool flip side of the coin in a way that I don't think ever talked about, but when we were discussing prior to this, we both said something very close echo of that, which I think is, the more I think about it. And as I was reading in Cascadia last night, I just felt so many little ripples of like a little gong inside of me of all of these beings that I know so well, having spent my years before Alaska in the Northern Rockies, the traditional and current home of the Blackfeet and the Flathead Salish Kootenai people. And I really came to know that place. Also the far eastern perimeter of Cascadia, in your description, the spine of the Continental Divide there. And I did work mostly a lot of my time in the montane, as you call it, in Cascadia, but the mountain area, which are very similar in Montana and Idaho. Anyway, all of these poems and references and stories to these beings, salmonberry, devil's club, brown bear, glacier lily, Douglas fir, gray jays, all of them are so familiar to me that I think of them anyway as kinds of characters. I love the way in the book you three editors decided to refer to species as beings instead, because I think those of us who've come to know the world beyond a guidebook, it feels so sterile sometimes to call something only a species. And I love the way you said human beings, and then we have bird beings and bear beings and tree beings, and that just is such a resonant thing for me. And so as far as your question goes, I think a big part of my understanding of humans and human stories has always been filtered through place and the places they live, the places they grew up, the places they make a living. Because of my lifelong career in manual labor, I have a very tactile experience of the world. And so I think fiction is often a home place for human stories to become entangled and kind of open to larger than who they're just about. But always for me, that's within a living place. And on the flip side, I would love to hear about your path, the three of you and yours as well, which we've talked about over many years, how the tension between the narrative experience of a place and the facts of it, the tension between the thrill of identifying something and knowing how it fits, but also being open to its uniqueness. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, C. Marie and Derek and I all also work as, I guess the best term is naturalists in various capacity. I mean, I often work in an official capacity as the naturalist guiding a trip. And Derek teaches an amazing class, co-teaches an amazing class with a biologist at Wenatchee College, where he teaches bringing students out into the field and trying to get them to experience place with both mind and heart, which is so much at the essence of Cascadia. And C. Marie also, again and again in her work, is trying to bridge those walls that we put up between the felt world, the experienced world, and the informational world. And I think that scientific accuracy is so important to really honor a place by digging in and knowing it well. But scientific language often strips away experiential language, and also often strips away cultural knowledge, traditional ecological knowledge, and my little niece's game that she plays, eating blue huckleberries off the bush. I think both of those are equally important to knowing a place and knowing a being. And we really wanted to encourage a sensory appreciation of Cascadia. I think it's amazing to know the millions of years mountain beaver has been on this planet. I also think it's pretty amazing to encourage someone to envision what it might be to see a shoot of vine maple disappear from your eyes as a mountain beaver tugs it into the burrow. That's important information too. And we really didn't want to privilege one type of information over the other. We wanted to wrap them together in an approachable story that again and again we kept thinking about kids in our lives and kid appreciative adults that might enjoy that approach, that might feel more welcomed into connection through an approach like that. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
I really am struck by the way you're describing that. Two things. I have only had the chance to read Cascadia as a PDF because it's just barely out. You haven't barely received your copies yet. And I'm not a big fan of the ebook. I've tried. It's way more convenient for travel, but it's
handy, but it's not the same.
I don't really get it. And last night, as I was reading this on my laptop screen, I felt immersed. When I looked up, it was like I was coming back from a place, which I think is an incredible feat to do that for me on a PDF anyway. But also just the whole book is imbued by, when I hear you say that about kids and accessibility, and it has a wonderful whimsicalness about it. Some of the illustrations and art are more fanciful almost. Yeah. While still having others that feel more graphic or more natural history descriptive. I love that. And I love the tone overall in the book of lyrical, imaginative direct address, like, oh, you think you know about Puffin, or look here closer at this, but also with a very rigorous attention to how everything fits together. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, about how you came to the authorial voice that unites them, and how, because it really is a very deft, I think, balance of inviting and also commanding.
I think it was pretty intuitive in a lot of ways. We really knew, I mean, we had some early readers who pushed us in that direction. I mean, at first, I think we were like, okay, let's just knock this out. Let's get this book out there. It needs to be out there, and we'll do the, range, habitat, distribution. Boom, we can do that. No problem. But early readers were like, you could do something different. What if? And they actually said, what if you introduce these beings as if you were introducing them to a kid in your life? And the light bulb went on. And of course, and that's what we try and do in the field. And that's what we want this book to embody. And I mean, I'm really grateful for the time we took with it, because I think if we had rushed into this, it wouldn't have been as interesting. It wouldn't have been as playful. I think there's a lot of play in the book, and I think that also comes from real deep familiarity. I see this in your book too, that when you know something really well, you can honor it and also be light with it. It's kind of like, when you watch someone who's a really, really great cook, and they're messing around and they're tossing in a pinch of salt and they're doing this little thing or that little thing, and it's just so easy and casual. There's just this deep familiarity with the materials and with the motions and with the equipment, and it's embodied, and it's so beautiful. And we wanted to bring as much of that to the book as we could with our experiences. But I don't want to talk anymore about me. I want to talk about you. And so I feel like, as I've, I saw an early version of Lookout a number of years ago, and I just, got the arc when it came out, and reading it, I recognized the book absolutely, but I noticed a lot of things that had been moved and shifted, things brought up and things quieted. And I wonder if you can talk about the evolution of this book for you, and what was most, I think, the time it took, where it started, how it came to be, and also for you, what felt important about finding that final form. Maybe just a detail or two about the final form, which is so beautiful, so generous to both people and dynamics and place and time. I don't want to say too much. I don't want to do any spoiler alerts. So I think I want to hand it over to you.
I think I like listening to you talk about it, because I think you're more eloquent than I am. But a place to start is just with the length of time. I mean, for a while, I used to be a little embarrassed by how long it takes me to write anything. I'm like the world's slowest writer, other than, I don't know, maybe like J.D. Salinger or something. But and now I've decided I'm just giving myself over to that. I'm just going to wear the crown of the person who it takes them. I mean, this book, the first chapter of it began as a short story in 1997, when I was in my, early 20s. And I wrote it in a class that I took with Bill Kittredge. I wasn't even in the program, the MFA program that he was so lauded for in Missoula. And he told me, oh, this is a novel. He had a very brusque, kind of straightforward way. And I was like, oh my God, please, it's not a novel. I can't write a novel. I was like writing stories. And anyway, I put it away for a decade. I came back to it. I noodled around with it. It took me from when I wrote it in 97 until when it comes out next month. It'll be, the better part of 25 years, not all of which was active. Much of that was buried, like the little.
You did write a whole nother book in the middle of that.
But that took me a while too. But anyway, I have really become a proponent, for me anyway, of banging the drum for the people who need a lot of mulling time, and that is okay. It's a different process, but for me, it has been really essential. I couldn't have written this book fast. There's no way. National Novel Writing Month would not have produced this in a million years, or even a first draft of it, to be honest. So even though I know there's a lot of, you can do it, get up and go around, that's very important too, around starting and finishing and momentum, I'm here, I think my place is to speak for the slow, the quiet, plodding slow. And I really feel, in a way, the book can change as I change. And I feel like because I am always morphing internally, and as I see my position in the world, taking time with something allows the book to do that too. And as far as the structure, I mean, the book itself, it flips between, there's an omniscient, somewhat close to Cody narrator, as you heard at the start, that is the carry through of the whole narrative of the book. And then it alternates every chapter between those. Every odd, even numbered chapter is a first person persona character driven chapter by 15 of the characters in this world. And that started as a little bit more of just experimental in the first draft, where there were a few of those. And then I eventually came to it as an actual structure where it moved between. And I think like you were getting at with the multivocal quality, deciding to have multiple artists for each community and each poet represented, I think, no more than twice, allowing this multitude of voices to tell the story of Cascadia from all different angles. I felt like, a novel is very different than an anthology. It's just one person's vision and one person's voice. But by incorporating the personas of as many characters as I felt I could inhabit in a way that was honest and ethical, I felt that I wanted to invite that same multi-lensed way of knowing. And I'm
so glad you did. I mean, and I want to say, I think, Cody seems like the core of the book to me. Cody is the core of the book. She starts the book, she threads through the book, she's the hub to which all these spokes connect. So I love that sense of going out and coming back, and you do such a great job of delicately managing foreshadowing. So something that happens in one narrative, it's just a little seed planted, and there's not like the dun 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 music there could be, but then it comes up again later and you're like, oh, that's what's going on there. Yep. That's not a shocker, not a surprise, because I hate it in books where, okay, so plausibly this thing could happen out of the blue, but it really feels like a betrayal of my intelligence as a reader. And I feel like Lookout really trusts the intelligence of the reader to be, and emotional intelligence too, to be in the story, but then also to recognize later on that, oh yeah, should have seen that coming, or maybe I did see that coming, but not in that way. And it invites me to go back and to think again about those earlier moments in the book. And I just really admire how deftly you were able to do that. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. One thing we both talked about, we talked a little before this meeting, but we also talked a little bit about, and I think we've touched on this already a little bit, how Cascadia Field Guide is an anti-field guide field guide. And Lookout, while very firmly set in Montana and points west, is kind of an anti-Western Western. It is fully in the place where it lives, and the people are shaped by the place where they live. But the ideas of stoicism, especially manly stoicism, are totally upended here. And the conversations about urban spaces, Christine, I don't know how much I want to say, because I don't want to give away plot points. I wonder, so I feel like I should let you talk about those things.
Well, I mean, yeah, I think your description of the two books as anti what they are is so interesting to me, because we both have a bit of anti in us. Both of us are our first instinct is critical, to push and be like, wait a minute, but maybe, are you sure? And so it makes total sense to me that, I mean, you've been talking about the wonder underbelly to science, and the how to be precise without being dogmatic in the world you're in now in Cascadia so beautifully, that it seems to me like the anti-field guide is the perfect way to describe what you and your co-editors have done. And I love it that the anti is a part of that. And I feel similarly, like you said about the Western. I mean, I have very ambivalent feelings about Westerns. I have loved many. There were many that were, A.B. Guthrie's Big Sky and Louis L'Amour's Lonesome Dove, and things I used to watch as a kid. Was so captivated by the notions of expanse and even stoicism and stick-to-itiveness and all of that. But there's also so much just toxic bullshit in Westerns, so many tropes that assume they know just how people are and how they'll be. If they're this way, they're this way. And if they do this, they're happy and triumphant. And if they don't, they're locked in the corral. And so in a way, having access to some of the parts of the Western, the groundedness, the sense of conflict, the expansiveness of the place was so appealing to me, while being able to say, wait, but you think, are you sure about, was very, once I started into it, it just became, there was no other way to do it. And I sense the same was for you. Like it wasn't possible to make a field guide that was only factual. Part of what drew you to it was the story.
Yeah, sorry, I got a little frozen there. But I also, no, but I want to just go back to, I think one of the things I love about Cody is that Cody, it doesn't even feel like the characters in this novel are aggressively pushing against tropes. They just are. And they are these complicated selves. And I so appreciate that. It doesn't feel like an agenda-driven novel. There are agendas in there. There are political little screws that are tightened. And I love that. But it doesn't feel like the story of the novel is built in order to carry those moments. They just are part of the lives of the characters. And I love that so much. Even the way that plants and non-human beings are acknowledged in the book as part of the family, whether it's the household family or the larger family that's just the world people walk through, live in, dream through, stumble through. I love that about Lookout. And let's talk about fire, maybe. Lookout. I think it's important to say, for people who might not know much about forest fire culture in the West, although, man, who doesn't these days? Just a little bit about that title. When did you come up with the title? And
I did not. Here's where I give full props to my titler. My husband and life partner, Gabe Travis, is my titler. He's titled almost everything that anyone's ever mentioned. That's a great title, is because of him. I went back and forth on the title of this forever. And when that one came out in a brainstorming session, it felt so right to me, because it has so many, it has the command, look out. It can have the levity of like, look out, like, fun between kids, and can have a sense of threat. It can have a sense of tending, warning. It has a sense of a perimeter visual, as well as a boundary. And so for me, that is part of what all of it was just wrapped up in. And I can't take any credit for it, except for knowing that I occasionally can see a good idea when it comes across my path.
I feel like most of my good ideas are actually Lisa's good ideas that I just borrow. Mostly, I told my friend Miller the other day, I'm just a magpie, really. I'm just listening for other people's good ideas. And I'm like, ooh, shiny.
Well, it was funny when you mentioned, there's one spot, I didn't read this in the book, but where Cody talks about one of her little bird mnemonics for remembering Downy, the woodpeckers. Downy is dainty and Harry is huge. And I remembered that came from Liz. So I was looking for that to see. Actually, I had so many, speaking of the books together, little cross pollinations where I'd read Gray Jay and then think of where the Gray Jay is in the book, or read Salmonberry and remember where that was. It's so interesting to me how much cross, that attention to landscape brings a kind of connection, whether by genre or plot or anything else. It may not be there, but when we look deeply at a place, others looking deeply at the same place are connected to us. And that's a beautiful thing about the anthology, I think, in a whole, that all those people feel like a family. And I feel related to them because I love that place too. So, yeah.
We ought to probably leave it there, because we're at the place, and Liz, you needed to be somewhere in your car very soon.
But I have one more question.
One more? Okay. If you're not gonna be late, go ahead.
Well, it's going to snow tomorrow, so I think things are canceled for me. We had a weather alert, but yay, snow day. But I think one thing that I wanted to just say also how much I appreciate about Lookout, and maybe ask Christine to talk about this a little bit. You know, in the anthology, we really wanted we know how diverse Cascadia is. Both the beings, the not more than human beings, and the human beings, and so we really wanted to make sure the voices that are held in the pages here come from geographically all over, racially, culturally, all kinds of relationships to place and to self. And also we really made a concerted effort as editors to, in the stories, thread the needle in terms of ways. I mean, I'm white. My co-editor, Derek, is white. C. Marie Furman is Native. But how do we honestly and with integrity acknowledge different cultures within Cascadia in the being stories in particular, without paying lip service, without co-opting stories that are not ours to tell, but without erasing things? And that, you know, we did our best, and I'm sure we flopped around a little bit and there are failures, but it was something that we really focused on in working on Cascadia. And, you know, a Western novel has its own set of stereotypes that it has to push against if we're talking about race in the West. And I wonder if you want to talk a little bit about that and how you found your path in Lookout, which is so beautiful, I think, in the ways that it welcomes many people to the story.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's one I feel like I could probably do better justice to in a lot longer, but I'll try to be succinct. It's interesting because, you know, there's a lot spoken about visual diversity, being able to see oneself in a literature and how much that means, and how white writers have often created worlds that are just assumed to be white. And it's always been interesting to me to think about that tendency if I have it in my own work. Obviously, I have a white family. I, grew up in a white neighborhood, although my childhood was very diverse and my experience of the West was very diverse. And so I feel like to write stories that I know, having them be only white would be just not right, not real. So far from having it feel to me like, oh, I need to have a token inserted so the story isn't all white, I feel like my experience of the West was so interwoven with working on fire crews with people who were members of a native tribe that had been in that area for centuries and eons longer than I had ever imagined as coming to it as a new person, or working at an abortion clinic where the woman who trained me was a mental health specialist who was from Blackfeet Reservation. And so to me, writing a novel, even though I'm a white writer, that didn't include those other stories would have felt very arrogant and very dismissive of the world as I have experienced it. It was very important to me in inviting in other characters besides the ones that most closely represent my own way, that I didn't write first-person chapters from the perspective of someone that I didn't feel I could properly imagine with credit to their inner world. And so that was one place that I decided to write toward full picture of diverse characters when I could do so as the way they would be seen or speak, or that I had experienced, but not inhabit an inner world. And I was guided a lot by Paisley Reckdahl has a great distinction she makes in her amazing book. I happen to have it here because I had to find the quote.
Oh, I have it here too.
Appropriate a Provocation, which I really recommend, where she makes a distinction about the difference between appropriation and compassionate or intellectually engaged cultural approximation, which I think is an interesting distinction. And it's a way of saying, how can we approximate a knowledge enough to invite a full picture without staking it as our own or as something we have absolute authority on?
Which is so much the job of fiction in general too, right?
Yes.
And
Yep.
I think, yeah, thank you for letting me ask that final question.
Yeah. I hope it wasn't too confusing. I feel like I mull over how to say that best over and over. And yeah, that's a great way to go further. I have lots more questions too, but I have a feeling we're going to get the hook.
Well, it's not a question of the hook. It's what you guys said you wanted to do, and we're just so grateful that you took your time out today. And these 2 new books, people should go out and buy them. Okay, so that ought to be the first. That ought to be the first order of business to buy Lookout by Christine Bile.
Liz, did you hold up the cover? Can you hold the cover up another sec?
Yeah. Well, why don't you hold yours up and we'll do.
You'll
hold them both. All right. Yeah. All right. So there we go. Buy those 2 books. An extraordinary anthology, co-edited by Elizabeth Bradfield, and a debut novel by Christine Bile. And while you're at it,
you can go contribute to AQR since you're pitching wares, Ron. Thank you so much to Ron and to AQR for hosting a space, not just for us today, which is really meaningful, obviously.
This ongoing series, it's been so rich and amazing.
Everybody, I have gotten to hang out with so many people I admire via this series over the years. So thank you for that.
Well, you guys are great. Very, very grateful to both of you. And so, okay, and thank you again. A different Cody Carver at the Anchorage Museum, who is amazing, and Julie Decker, director of the museum. So for now, goodbye, everybody, and we'll see you during our next event.
Thanks again, Ron.
Obviously,
the cat curtain is closing.
Yeah,
well, from the cat.
He's been very interested in this event, by the way. I think you saw that.
It's all the animals.
He knows, because he's like, oh, am I a cat being? You might have a little attitude on your hands this afternoon.
It's a she.
She. Sorry.
Her pronouns are she. Her name is Juju. Sometimes good juju, sometimes not so much.
Yeah,
that's the thing with Juju.
But very smart. See?
All right, she knows we're done. Okay, goodbye. Thank you, everyone.
All right, take care, everybody. Bye for now.
Bye for now.